afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible. My name is Christine Mungai. As you've heard, I'm a writer and journalist and curator of Baraza Media Lab. Very excited to be moderating this panel today. We're going to be talking about digitization and the online cultural heritage experience. I'm happy to be joined by Edward Sigei from the Kenya Copyright Board, Michael Murungi from Google Kenya, and Caroline Mwenda from the National Museums.
Thank you.
So one of our panelists is traveling and so is not able to join us, but she was kind enough to put together some video remarks. So I'll ask for that video to be played now.
My name is Chao Tayana Maina. I am the founder of African Digital Heritage. We are a non-profit based here in Nairobi, focusing on digital technologies and digital solutions for African heritage. Our approach is a holistic one, so we don't just focus on the technology, we also focus on exploring things like access, dissemination, archiving, and what happens when, after, and in the process of digitization. Our main focus areas are digitization, innovation around heritage, so looking at things like applications, virtual reality, virtual experiences, visualizations. We also do a lot of research, particularly to strengthen the field of African digital heritage and the ways in which African heritage is represented online. And finally, we do a lot of training as well and capacity building with museums, communities, libraries. And it's a pleasure to really be here. Digitization is, for me, a primary form of decolonization, and I say this because I believe that the work of technology is not just about futures, about building futures. It's also about strengthening pasts, strengthening identities, and in this way how we can radically reimagine, reframe, talk about history and culture in a very different way. When we speak about the ways in which African heritage has been represented, the ways in which it has been narrated, the ways in which it has been kept, even physically, we are looking at a very, a system that works to disenfranchise African people from their cultural pasts, whether it's through the kind of narratives and biases and racism that we encounter even when we look at our history, or even the ways in which museums are framed today, in which objects are kept away from people and taken from people, looted, migrated, etc. And so technology being a way to, one, create access to culture and to artifacts and archives that people don't normally have access to physically. But it's also not just about access, it's also, I believe, it's also about the ways in which this access can enhance other activities. So the freedom to, for example, use archives in a film, to deconstruct, to challenge, to reinterpret archives. Access is just the beginning. I think the true form of decolonization is what people do when they have access to this material. And so the job for us as cultural practitioners is not just to digitize things en masse and say they're online. It's about inviting audiences and asking people to share their feedback, to question the material, to reimagine it, and so decolonization is central, very much so, to technology, but also to the space of technology and culture as well. The biggest importance of digitization is the fact that people can access material. And I say access in the sense that we are producing a lot of knowledge online and we're also storing it online. Yeah. So whereas before you would have to go to the library, your first point of contact, for a query, for a question, for research, now our first point of contact or our first point of research is digital spaces. And what does it mean when we assume that everything is online, but actually it's not? There's this idea that if something is not on the internet, then they don't exist. So if you Google someone and they're not on the internet, it's like, do they really exist? And it's the same thing also, I believe, with the culture and the history that we are trying to really say we existed, we still exist, and we want to have a way in which audiences, in which children, in which people at different levels of education or arts and who want to access this material can find it. And so the memories that we are creating, we are saying that they're not just things that we hold for ourselves, but we hold in trust for other people as well. And if the internet has become the central knowledge creation and production space, then we also need to be exploring how our memories and our culture exist in this space rightfully.
Those were some really insightful remarks from Chow. And one of the things that stands out for me in what she said is that digitization for her is an integral part of decolonization. We think of the digital space as something that is always future-minded and future-focused, but for her, it's about strengthening our pasts and our identities and our stories. So I'd like to turn to Michael now, and I'd like you to respond or to kind of base your remarks on that idea. We think of Google as a technology company, and we think of technology in a very kind of futuristic framing.
Yeah.
But Chow here is challenging us to think of digitization as part of the work of recovering our past in some way, right? That
Yeah.
creates our present. So I'd like to ask you to speak to Google's rationale in getting involved in this digitization activity, right? Here at the museum and also in other contexts. What really was Google's intention in getting involved in this, in our cultural heritage and products, and how has that experience been for a company that is seen to be oriented in a very different way?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Absolutely. I think our intention as Google is driven primarily by our mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And in doing that, we see the value and the power of digital to transform access to information. So what we have is a product and a platform known as Google Arts and Culture. You can search for it on Google or on your other search platform. We embrace our competition. Search for Google Arts and Culture, and the first result you'll see is a link to Google Arts and Culture, which is a platform we've created to support cultural organizations, heritage organizations, artists all over the world, in the same way that the YouTube platform exists to give somebody, an artist, a voice and build an audience for free. This platform, Google Arts and Culture, exists for cultural organizations like the National Museums. It exists as a non-profit organization, as a non-profit platform. It's non-profit in terms of who is featured, in terms of how Google manages the platform. You not see any advertisements on this platform. And we do that because we want to help in those people who do not have the means to access and consume and participate in culture and heritage, whether as a cultural organization is not able to manage its own platform, have its own resources, technology-wise, dedicated to digitization, to be able to use that platform and showcase and own it as they please. And also on the part of the internet users, to be able to participate meaningfully. And that is why the subject of access and decolonization, in the sense of giving people the tools that they need to manage their culture, to document their heritage, and to be able to participate and bring that culture and that heritage into the world's heritage in the way that the other parts of the world are participating both online and offline. That is the reason that it exists, and that's what drives our ethos. And for our experience, just to answering your final question, I think I know Caroline here from the National Museums of Kenya will talk more about what we did in collaboration with the National Museums. The experience has been phenomenal. For example, myself, as a Kenyan, working for a US organization, I see my role very much as being inside on the outside. I represent Kenya and my culture and my people and my country in Google. And my work is to make sure that Google's products, tools, Google's processes, and Google's programs are a fit for our country, and they are a fit for the growth of my people and my culture. So the experience has been great because when I get to have my culture, my country represented, and supported by my company in speaking about our heritage, I feel very much fulfilled in my work and in my mission. That's my experience in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that. You invited Caroline to speak to this, and I'd like to invite her as well. Caroline, we're here at Nairobi National Museum, and the National Museums of Kenya has been working with Google Arts and Culture in this digitization process. I'd like you to speak to that and to let us know what kinds of work have been digitized and what the response has been from folks who interact with museum materials or cultural heritage in a very kind of traditional way, and what the experience has been ever since bringing Google Arts and Culture on board.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Michael. The beginning of the process of digitization, if I go back to about 2016, meant that there was quite a bit of resistance because the museum, the way we have done things, being the normal statement that I was given, meant that there was resistance and everyone wants to protect the collections, protect the stories. The fear, obviously, at the very beginning was appropriation. And when Michael and team came forward, one of the things they wanted to do was 360-degree cameras within the galleries and showcase some of the galleries we have. Now, the big fear then was, if you showcase using 360-degree cameras what we have in gallery, then we won't have footfall.
You won't have foot traffic, people coming in.
No, you have showcased everything online, so why should they come? So the quick thinking meant calling someone who has gone before me or gone before us. And one of the museums internationally was Smithsonian and the British Museum.
Right.
And they quickly responded and said, on the contrary, it has increased footfall because now people get a glimpse. We make assumptions, like Nyairu mentioned, that people understand what the museum does. We make assumptions that they know what is inside. If you ask your Uber driver, next time you're in one, museum kuna nini, what's in the museum? They'll say, uko ni kwa nyoka. And that's what they know. So if we go forward and with the Google team, then take a glimpse, a picture of what we do in some galleries, they have an idea. And that will push them to come. So that's what ended up happening. So our greatest fear, obviously, was the footfall, appropriation being another one. And one of the big projects we did first was culture. So we took culture elements, our cultural department, and with high-resolution photographs, captured all we could with our different cultural elements, calabashes, headgear, jewelry, fishing equipment, just to showcase what different cultures used and how similar many of our cultures are. When this went live, there was such a conversation because it's very fascinating. The people who went on the site were more the children, the teenagers who are looking for information on school, and families trying to talk to their children. So when we look at analytics, you find many of them being people either in the Americas, in the UK, and in Kenya. So my assumption, not being able to be exact on who it is probably Kenyans living abroad. And then them impacting the people they're living with. So that was one of the benefits of going digital, especially with this Google project. Now, some of the things we fear that will continue to happen, because when you go into digital space, you don't quite understand the risks that exist because they change every day. So from screenshots to someone then copying our cultural elements and claiming it as their own, and I hope Bwana Sige will speak to this, is how do we protect that? And interestingly now, is because it's digital, and we are doing it with a search engine, we get optimized, and we virtually call dibs on our cultural assets, be they tangible or intangible. So now no one can lay claim to our assets because we have already put it out there that they belong to us. So that's the benefit of going digital. So if you think of the museum as essentially a colonial, the first museum being a colonial construct.
Right.
The new museum now allows us to showcase in so many ways. So we are decolonizing just by going digital and allowing us to be the storytellers. So it's no longer what we would say the hunter telling the story. We are telling our own story. We are now able in a space to engage with animators, and they showcase superheroes from our communities and allow the children then to be in admiration of their own culture, their own ethnicity, because there's a superhero they can attach to their ethnicity, their community. And there's such pride because of that digitization.
I was going to ask you about that, to speak to that podcast or audio series about the superheroes of Kenya and how that has been received, not just among children, but even among adults. A lot of us actually don't know our stories. That's just the truth of the matter. And that was one of my first interactions with Google Arts and Culture. And I just want you to unpack what went behind that project and what the reception has been.
The project was spearheaded by young Kenyans, a family of young Kenyans whose company was primarily for animation, illustration. And they've interacted with the museum community for a very long time. They've grown up within the museum spirit and rank and family. And so when they decided to interact now on a more professional level, they took up what they know best, and that is communities, our ethnicity, and the stories that have not been told. But the challenge now was to go to all counties and as many ethnic communities as we possibly can and tell one story, at least one story, of a champion from that community. So be it a seer, a healer, a warrior, there was someone that every community can talk about. And that's what they went after. The result of that means our analytics moved from a few thousand hits a month to now we're in the millions. So there was ownership of that process. And adults, children are thirsty for knowledge of their ethnicity and pride in their ethnicity. There are times when, as a country, we are divided based on our ethnicity. And when you can speak with pride about who you are and what your people have done before, then it gives you credence to then accept and acknowledge each other as people who have fought for this country or healed or just have interaction on different levels. There are superheroes who are women. And when George speaks about traditional female builders, we speak about the women architects of the Gabra community. So women are celebrated in line with men. The healers are celebrated. So Harriet, as a botanist, is celebrated. We are talking about seers because we are very spiritual beings. So all that comes out in that kind of digitization, and it's beautiful.
It is a wonderful series, and I encourage all of you to search for it and listen and interact with not only the audio component of it, but also the really dynamic visuals. The way it's illustrated is really fantastic. So, Edward, I'd like to bring you in from kind of a bird's eye view now, speaking from a slightly higher level perspective. The digital space is assumed to be this kind of Wild West where Caroline was talking about this fear of appropriation of, people are always protective of their collections, and digitization is assumed to be quite a big risk in terms of how to control what happens once it's in the digital space. As people say, the internet never forgets, right? And once it's out there, you don't really know how it's going to travel, how it's going to move in the world. So speaking from a perspective from the Kenya Copyright Board, I'd like you to talk on digitization as an opportunity and also as a threat in the issues of cultural heritage production and preservation. How do you see how do you see us navigating these issues? As much as Chao was talking about digitization being a particular arena for decolonization because it provides such access that that for so long has been denied even to the people who own that heritage. You know, museums in Europe and America, you know, you have to apply for a visa, you know, to go and interact with something that your people created. How do you see that issue of intellectual property and copyright? How can we navigate that minefield in what is considered to be this very wild kind of domain?
Thank you very much, Christine, and it's a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon. And also in the culture of, following the culture of public service, I have 15-page speech that I would like to read. All right, but I'll not read it given what they have, they have not done that. But I would like to look at culture in two ways. That we are looking at culture in the past and the culture into the future, or contemporary culture. And when you speak about the past, you know, our culture, our heritage, now the question of theft of patrimony comes in, where people, due to that access, people are trying to steal the what you call traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions belonging to people in a place far away and use it. I think we've always seen that happening in the area of fashion, where Kikoi has always been under threat. And, you know, I saw one of our fashion houses in South Africa was trying to take away certain designs of a local community in South Africa. And so that is a threat that we have to, that is still real, and we have not dealt with it sufficiently. But there are discussions at regional and international levels to deal with it under the WIPO and the RIPO. So we have a protocol that we have signed, and we need to now start having it domesticated and then enforced. But looking at contemporary culture and culture as it is, as we live, now there are issues of copyright that arise. And that the first issue is really every author wants to have a control over access
Of their work.
Yes, and they also want to control any copying and use for the purposes of getting value for their intellectual property. And so I'm looking at technology and digitization being really an issue of technology. As if you look, my conclusion is technology is an ally. Is an ally of culture. In that it has offered both the access and it has offered tools to break the controls that the author wants. At the same time, it has offered the tools to prevent that to prevent that uncontrolled access. And in the area of technology is providing the threat and is also providing the tools. So there are certain tools that offer mitigation to the threat, so that is blunting the threat. And we have in copyright, there are things like technical protection measures, which are really access control measures. Then there are also things like rights management information. That means every time you put something on the internet, make sure it goes with the metadata that allows you to monitor the use of your work wherever it may be, whether legitimate or not. And then also looking at the new and emerging technologies, the blockchain, the artificial intelligence, you really now have tools to further secure what you have. In terms of opportunities, you're looking at the issue of documentation. I'm looking at the project by the National Museums here, the project that I saw being discussed about Timbuktu. which is under the same program. And it is really very, very key that if we are not careful, certain activities may be a threat to cultural heritage, because the Islamists in Mali, for instance, threatened Timbuktu. They destroyed Timbuktu. The Taliban destroyed very important places in Afghanistan. If we had something that we had saved at that time, probably we would still be having that heritage. So it's an ally now that we are having these things documented, being accessible to people virtually who are not able now to visit Timbuktu because of what is happening in that country. And then we're also looking at new models of business. Many people are now running to NFT. They are minting non-fungible tokens, and they are getting value for it. So it's a new opportunity. Recently with COVID, we had the people in the film industry. Instead of going to theater by theater, and then moving to the next stage of monetization, they moved it directly to subscription and streaming. So those are very, very important movements that will not be reversed even if COVID has gone, has left us. Hopefully it has. Looking also at the issues of, you know, I may have to refer to my my long speech. I'm looking at virtual reality as an opportunity also for our traditional oral culture to be experienced afresh, anew. 3D technologies, animation, these are also, it provides an opportunity. That means our culture, even if we don't no longer pass information in the oral tradition, will still be alive in a new way, which can always be reviewed. It becomes like an historical or part of our heritage. And it may save some of our languages as well, because some of these things probably will be required to people to translate the information. So I'm looking at this culture as or digitization really, and culture as a big opportunity. There is threat of misappropriation. There are also claims of piracy. We also have the Google Book Project, very controversial internationally, but I think we've reached a point where some understanding has been reached on what the use of how they have done it. But also some people may recall the Gutenberg project, where a lot of this information was made available in public domain books. That means books that have come out of copyright, public domain in that case, and they were made available and to many people. And then it's also an opportunity for people to transmit culture. I saw a project in Europe called Crafted, where Europe is now trying to catalog and preserve the crafts of the European people with a view of retaining the skills and passing them on to the next generation. Mm-hmm. So many people, we don't trust. Change is a problem. We don't trust change. We are not secure facing the change. But it's probably one of the changes the digitization technology should align with culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edward. I'm going to give an opportunity for comments and reflections from those present here. But before I do, as we are thinking of our comments and reflections and questions, Michael, I'd just like to bring you in. Edward has talked about culture not just being something that exists in the past that we are trying to recover, but culture is also something that we create in the contemporary moment. And I don't think there's anything that exemplifies that more than Kenyans' behavior online. We're always creating memes and jokes and all this kind of stuff that really does not really have attribution as such, but it kind of travels through our public consciousness moment by moment. So I'm just thinking from where you stand. You talked about being an insider-outsider, right? About being a Kenyan in this kind of multinational, international space. How do you process this kind of very chaotic but also very dynamic way that people create cultural moments, using things that we cannot really monetize or copyright, but they actually have this presence in the public consciousness through memes, jokes, things that are not really taken seriously, but I see them as an actual valid form of political commentary, of social commentary, of capturing our Kenyanness, our lived experience in this very interesting country. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think our role as a technology platform provider is to enable those kinds of voices and those kinds of unique expressions of culture to come alive without wanting to impose our own thoughts on what form those expressions should take. So, I mean, if you look at our platforms, because we create them to enable people who want to express themselves to do so, whether it is YouTube or Google Arts and Culture, we let you own the platform, own your page, own your channel, subject, of course, to our community guidelines based on what is right and what is wrong, based on local law, and what is appropriate for an online audience. So I think ours is to allow people to use their voice and their space and their communication in the way they deem fit for their culture, and to make sure that our tools as a company are responsive to those forms of expression. So it's not we don't necessarily get in and and
Moderate.
and
Moderate.
and moderate. Thank you for saving me there, Caroline. But we just provide the platform and allow it to be what it will be based on the users, what they want.
And I don't know if anyone was prepared for what Kenyans online or Kenyans on Twitter can do.
Yeah.
What they can do, no man can do. So do we have any reflections or questions from the audience? I'm sure those who are walking around with mics can see the two hands. I'll ask you to keep your comments brief because we don't have much time. And also because we are eager for a break, right? Yes, go ahead. You can quickly introduce yourself and then give your comment or question.
Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for your wonderful engagement and discourse. My name is Purity Akoth from LACAB, a technology and social innovation hub in Kisumu. We work with youth in creative arts, training them technology skills and entrepreneurship skills. And I want to thank you, Bwana Sigei, for mentioning artificial intelligence. But my question goes to Mr. Murungi. So it's good that we are redefining our culture and heritage, especially in the technology era. So what are some of the legal and ethical policy implications of artificial intelligence to our culture and heritage? Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll take the other question and then answer them together.
Hi, my name is Amaus Kimani. I'm an artist and curator, very interested in documenting the evolution of contemporary culture. So same questions or same things came up from the previous panel. could you please talk about erasure versus evolution? So, like culture is continuously evolving, and so how do we get the difference between this is a new culture that has evolved versus like a destructive way of erasing our past or overriding it in a not so good way? And then
Maybe Caroline, you can take that. How do we think about what is actual culture evolving, and what should we be worried about erasure? That's your question, right?
yeah, and then so the other one on tools and on technology as a tool. So just my own opinion, I feel like tools are, I mean, tools are things that we use to get to things or to get to places. But then technology is evolving very fast and it's getting very exciting. And I feel like sometimes we're jumping onto new technologies and overriding older technologies that may function better because of their novelty. So how do we also deal with that as we're trying to preserve culture?
Thank you for those questions. Maybe we can have Michael address the first one.
Yeah. Thanks, Purity. That's a very difficult question. But what I'll do is, so the question is around, what are the policy and legal implications and ethical implications of artificial intelligence on culture? I'll do no better than just say that as Google, we were one of the first technology companies to release a set of principles to govern how we approach artificial intelligence and technologies that are driven by that. And in those sets of principles, there are certain things that they are the fundamentals of how we will operate and work with artificial intelligence. There are 7 principles. To save time, I'll just read them. I'll not necessarily expound on them. The first is that we said that for AI, our engagement with AI has to be socially beneficial. You can later search on, and you'll see what that means, because just to save time. And we also want to avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias. You've heard about how algorithmic bias can actually enhance the biases that exist in the real world, and therefore cause technology to actually work against humanity as opposed to working for it. 3, AI will be built and tested for safety. 4, it will be accountable to people. 5, it will incorporate privacy design principles. 6, it will uphold high standards of scientific excellence. And 7, it will be made available for users that accord with these principles. You can search for Google AI principles and you'll see what that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Google is not the only company that's working on AI technologies. There are many of them out there. And thank you for that question. AI and artificial technology, machine learning and those kind of technologies are going to be something that is not out there in some distant future, but we'll soon realize that they are very much part of our lives today. So thank you for bringing that into our consciousness and in our conversation today. Caroline, the question about how, as someone who thinks about culture, the past, the present, and the future, how do you think about what part of this is cultural evolution? Because culture is not something that's dynamic. I always resist the idea that culture is something that exists somewhere in the past. We need to go and get it. We need to go and recover it. But it's actually something that we are creating and living today. How does that kind of interact with the idea of erasure? At what point are we, quote unquote, losing our cultures?
So evolution of culture happens because of how we interact with other communities. Some of it is in the fabrics we used to use in our traditional dress. That has changed. We don't use the stiff leather that we used to use before. If you look at wedding ceremonies now, people are using nice soft fabric in designing traditional outfits, especially with the Kikuyu ratios. You have the brown maintained, but it's not hide or leather or skin. It's nice soft fabric and beautifully designed. That's evolution of culture. The dresses are not strict in how they look. They are designed to be fashionable. Evolution is also in language. Let's celebrate Sheng. Sheng is our slang, and it's also an evolution of culture, and it's ever changing. So evolution of culture is on how we interact with different communities and how we interact with modernity. Our food is evolving. Now we have each other to pick and choose from. So in terms of traditional vegetables, what you used to eat, now I can eat, and we both interact, and I'll start using coconut milk, which I probably didn't in my community, but that's part of evolution of culture. When it comes to erasure, there's the difficult erasure which will come from what we are experiencing in certain parts of the world with war. And you'll see Afghanistan and Syria were pillars of art and culture, and that is erased with a few quick shots.
Explosions.
Yeah, a few quick blows. And I can tell you this, digital has helped in trying to reconstruct, especially with Syria. I think we were having that conversation. So from NASA's satellite imagery, helping to reconstruct some of their heritage sites, to the fact that they had some digitization with high-powered cameras capturing their cultural artifacts. Then if you know how war is with regards to heritage, the looters are on the wait. As soon as one sharp blow goes off, they're going into different sites just to loot these cultural assets. So once you digitize, using this artificial intelligence or any other form of intelligence online, those who are dealing in the black market and want to go online to sell can easily be caught because of the artificial intelligence prowling the web streets. So in terms of erasure of culture, I would think of war first. Others, I want to be diplomatic because religion has played a really strong part in erasing certain aspects of our culture. So I don't know how to broach this subject diplomatically, but we have had to, we have, as Africans, let go of certain aspects of our culture to pick up religion, which was a foreign concept, and left behind our own traditional religions. So religion is to blame for certain aspects of erasure of our culture. So those are the two. But again, with things that, like digital, we can now tell our own stories. So we are also piecing and telling these stories and allowing our children and ourselves to be proud of the traditional religions that existed, because they weren't barbaric and backward. They were spiritual, they were beautiful. And so we celebrate some of them. But that's not to say we didn't have an element of being forceful for certain things. When it comes to twins, the birth of twins being taboo, and certain things like that. I think we can happily erase certain aspects of our culture which were dangerous, which threatened the lives of certain people. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
We had the question of technology, right? How technology is a tool, and how we can think about technology being a tool in capturing our heritage. And I think as part of our conversation so far, we have touched quite a bit on that. I want to ask, do we have any questions or comments coming in from our online audience? If we can begin queuing that up, I would be grateful, because we're just getting to the end of this panel in the next few minutes. If any of them do come up, I'll give the opportunity for the MC to begin to queue them up.
And Christina, can add on
Go ahead.
As we're doing that.
Yep.
On what Caroline has talked about on the evolution of culture, There's actually a recent, not recent, maybe 2 decades, a judgment of the High Court in which there was a question of cremation, whether cremation is in keeping with African culture. And the High Court, Justice J.B. Ojwang then in the High Court said that cremation is not necessarily against or an outsider to Kenyan culture or traditions, because he said that the traditions of Kenya keep evolving. They're not stuck in place, they're not static. And at that time, he did entertain a claim of cremation as a way of enforcing a community's customary law. So that goes to answer the question around evolution of culture.
Definitely. Carolyn, you've just brought up the issue of Sheng. And just looking at this audience, if I'm to gauge the median age here, I think most of us here, if you're Kenyan, you imagine that you know Sheng. You know a bit of Sheng. Let me just say, if you don't have a 20-year-old in your life, someone between the age of 14 and 21, I don't think you know Sheng. Because what is happening in that space, you're going to, as we say, you're going to float in some of these conversations because Sheng is really, really changing.
They say, "Autashikarada."
Okay, I'm going to allow one last round of comments and questions. I see 2 hands. And then in the meantime, as we are thinking of answering these questions, I'll also ask my panelists to start to think of your closing remarks. And by that, I mean one pithy, insight-packed sentence that we can take away from this session. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great panel. I just wanted to make a comment related to the opportunity provided by technology in the co-creation of cultural heritage and the ways in which, globally, the possibility of creating something absolutely new through a merging of cultural heritage experiences can become possible, so that the technology itself is an enabler of the creation of culture in an immensely collaborative manner. And I think this is something that, again, might be accelerated as we move forward, as we actually continue embracing culture. So this is more of a comment other than a question. Yeah. And I think that this is important for us to reflect on about this humanization and the collective creativity that becomes enabled by technology, and that's something that we might want to embrace and discuss going forward. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make that comment, because I really thought that we needed to look at that that possibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I see a hand at the back there.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Lago. My question is in itself an adventure. It has not happened, but I foresee it coming. Now,
Go for it.
We have an issue where in a debate or a discussion hall, some speaker can make good and exhilarating statements which generate laughter. And that same laughter, when it attracts more entertainment, then the producer or the host of that commercializes out of it, then the person who laughed may claim right over it. Yet, he or she is not the person who generated that laughter, because that laughter was provoked by the speaker. Mr. Copyright Board man, what is your observation?
Thank you for that.
Please, producer, capture our laughter for that.
All right. Can I? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Lago. And I would like to say that copyright is a is a very simple subject. Those are very complex subject. And probably, really, there is nothing new in the world. I think your issue has also already been resolved under the rules of copyright, in that this engagement, for instance, probably will be owned by the person who organized this session. So in that case, it will be TOESA or a British Council, depending on the nature of the engagement that they had. So in that case, you know, you can laugh, you can actually be subject of a picture, but you don't own copyright to your picture. You own privacy rights to your picture, but the person who took the photo is the owner of the copyright, or the person who made him take the picture is the owner of the copyright. So you may laugh, you may make a joke, but if it's on Churchill show, it belongs to Churchill or NTV, whichever is the agreement there is. So that issue has been resolved, yes, and I think it's not always in favor of the person who is participating.
Not always in the favor of the laugher.
Yeah, the new vocabulary, maybe the Sheng people can adopt it.
Sheng people, what's the word? Thank you so much, Edward, for that. I'm going to ask our panel to give us their closing thoughts, starting with Caroline and going in that way.
Digitization has helped us engage with different audiences, and social media is also one of the digitization aspects. And very interestingly, what has happened in the last few years, the small silver lining we find in the time of Corona was how we quickly used social media platforms for good. And for quite a number of people, they've taken up technology and trying to figure out ways to communicate or build humanity, as has been spoken by Professor. What we are experiencing as National Museum now is we are getting more communities or organizations from the social media spaces or who are tech inclined wanting to come over and work with us. And that's a beautiful thing. And so we encourage all those who have tech abilities and tech inclinations to come and explore. One of the teams we are seeing is one who wants to explore hologram imagery of our exhibits. And this offers an opportunity to then showcase a night at the museum like we would have. So we welcome all those with their tech inclinations to figure out how we can work together, because we are the museum. Consider us as your fossils that you need to bring into the tech age. And it's a beautiful thing that organizations like Google and smaller tech companies can consider working with the museum to bring out Kenya's heritage into the tech world.
Thank you so much for that. Michael?
Thank you, Christine. I think mine would be simply Kenya's culture, Africa's culture is cool. It is rich. Do not allow yourself to be censored. Do not allow Kenya's culture or Africa's culture to be censored. Do not even censor yourself. I'm so happy that my daughter, when she's doing her homework and reading about and writing about superheroes, she has the freedom to choose between Spider-Man, Superman, and within that, Luanda Magere, Nayese, Nabongo Mumia, and that even today as I was getting ready to come for this event, I was going through the many European suits that are in my wardrobe, because my job is mostly to engage with government, and normally, that means I have to be dressed in a suit like he is. And I told myself, but no, why do I have to do that? I'm going for a cultural event. I need to represent my culture and my heritage. So I'm going to put on my cultural attire or with some jeans just to make sure that I also say that I'm representing a Western company. And also put on my my African heart. I've never dressed like this before, so my statement is,
Well done, Michael. Well
I've not
done.
dressed like this before for a formal event. My statement, therefore, is both a fashion statement or a fashion exclamation mark. Do not censor yourself. Do not allow yourself to be censored. Your culture matters. Express it unreservedly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. In my final remarks, I want to borrow a word that was used by Professor Njogu. He said culture is an enabler. As it is, culture is an enabler of access, is an enabler of control, is an enabler of trade in cultural goods. It's a force for good that we should embrace, and for that purpose, we should work and ensure that our people adapt and relate in a friendly way with technology. Otherwise, our culture is under threat. Somebody else will have to come in and exploit it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to make one comment to respond to the previous panel. There are temporary exhibition halls at the National Museum and in different spaces in the counties. So I welcome CAVE to showcase. There's a bit of a cost attached, but there's space for you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you, Caroline, Michael, Edward. Thank you for making the time to be here and for your wonderful insights. And thank you for your attention and your participation. My closing remarks are just to echo what Chao said at the beginning of our panel, that we should think of the digital space as an opportunity to decolonize and not just to think of culture as something that exists in a futuristic kind of orientation, but also to recover the best of our pasts. Asanteni sana.